Hello, I'm Filip Sablik, President of Publishing and Marketing here at KaBOOM Studios. Welcome to Comic-Con at Home. We know that this is a convention that you all wait for every year, and it's truly one of our favorite annual experiences where we get to share our collective joy of comics together. Despite not all being in the same room this year, we've gathered a tremendous panel of creators with wonderful stories to share. And while we hope to provide you with some entertainment and escape over the next hour, we'd also be remiss if we didn't take the opportunity to explore and discuss some of the harsh realities of our world that we see reflected in the stories that we tell. So sit back and we invite you to discover yours, or perhaps discover a story that will connect someone in your life with the magic of comic book storytelling. And without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce our amazing panelists. I'm going to start with Gabby Rivera, who is a Bronx-born queer Puerto Rican author. She happens to be the first Latina to have written for Marvel Comics, where she penned the solo series America. And her debut novel, Juliet Takes a Breath, which is also being adapted into a graphic novel by KaBOOM Studios, has recently been republished just last fall by Penguin Random House. So make sure you check that out. Hey, Gabby, great to have you here. And then next up, we're really excited to have on, for the first time on a San Diego panel with us, and the first time I've had a chance to actually chat with her, Sabaa Tahir, who is the author of an Ember in the Ashes novel series. She began writing while she was working nights as a newspaper editor, which automatically makes her much more productive than I am, because all I do is watch TV in the evenings. And this, A Thief Among the Trees, is her first graphic novel collaboration. Welcome, Sabaa. And Sabaa's collaborator on the graphic novel is Nicole Andelfinger, who has always had a deep love of powerful storytelling. These days, she channels her imagination into writing comics, having brought to life many beloved characters, many of them with KaBOOM, including Adventure Time, Regular Show, Steven Universe, and many more. Nicole, it's always great to see you. And last, but certainly not least, is Matt Kindt, who is a New York Times bestselling writer and artist of comics and graphic novels that are too numerous to mention, but I will mention Department H, Mind Management, as well as the Eisner Award nominated Grass Kings from KaBOOM Studios, Black Badge, and Folklords, which we'll be talking about. Bang and Ether with Dark Horse Comics, and so many more. Matt has been nominated for 6 Eisner Awards and 6 Harvey Awards, and won once. But you know, we hope to add to that winning tally soon. Anyway, Matt, always awesome to hang out with you. Welcome, everyone. All right, I have rambled on enough. It is definitely time to get y'all talking. So as we're sitting here, many of us, or certainly some of us, have been in quarantine for over 90 days. And there's been a tremendous amount of unrest in that time, even 2020 standards. I know for me, it can be overwhelming. So what I'd like to know is, on a lighter note, what has been your moment of joy this week or in recent memory?
I had a really wonderful moment of joy last Wednesday, which is that I saw a debut author named Roseanne Brown, who is a Black author of young adult fantasy, and she hit the list with her debut, which is called A Song of Wraths and Wraiths and Ruin. I have the book on its way to my house, and I'm really excited to read it. But anytime you have an author hit with a debut, it's really special. And considering everything that was going on at the time, it just really seemed like it was very fitting.
That's amazing, and something to add to the read pile. And if I remember correctly, Sabaa, you landed on the New York Times bestseller list with your debut book as well, right?
I did, yeah, much to my surprise. That was really exciting. It was many years ago now. The list was sort of a different animal. So but I mean, I don't think that excitement ever changes or dims. So.
It's awesome. Nicole, how about you? What's been your moment of joy this week?
Oh, my moment of joy. So, I mean, I just found out. I don't know if it was from this week or last week, because time is kind of blending in together here. But I found out that Percy Jackson is coming back as a Disney Plus show. And I am So excited. I have opinions on the movies that we're not going to get into now because we have limited time. But oh my gosh, I'm so excited. And I saw that Rick Riordan was at the helm of the pilot. So here's a fingers crossed.
That's great. Well, that's going to go on the list for my kids to watch because we just watched Artemis Fowl on Disney Plus this weekend, and they're just at that age where they're ravenously consuming any kind of fantasy or kind of like aspirational fiction. So, Gabby, I know that you always bring joy to any panel you're on, so I'm really excited to hear what your moment of joy was.
In the spirit of being just really honest, this has been a tough week for Joy. It's been a tough day for Joy. This has been like a relentless time. There's always something, right? There's always another thing. But in trying to find that joy and center that joy, there's this wacky little show on Netflix called The Big Flower Fight. And it's like all these like amazing queer gay folks and some straights making flower sculptures that are like 10 feet tall lemurs and like where the wild things are creatures. And it's just like so fantastical and out of my craft world, like out of what I do, that I just found it this week and was like, here I will rest.
that is awesome. And you're 100% right. I think 2020 has definitely been a relentless year, and finding that joy is super important. Matt, how about you? Any recommendations where to find joy?
I've had so much extra time because I haven't had to travel as much this year. So I got caught up on Red Dead Redemption. I know that's an old video game, the second one, but then that's not where the joy came from. The joy came this morning. I had to go to the bank, and this is my other joy, is this scarf. Is I got to go into the bank with my bandit mask on, and it was totally fine. I walk into the bank with a bandit mask, and it was so exciting. I don't know why. That's where you gotta find joy where you can get it. That was it. That's the high point of the week.
Well, there you go. I think that's right. And I think finding, joy and finding little bright spots in our days and in our weeks is really important. And hopefully for the folks that are watching this at home, we're going to be able to introduce them to some new stories that will, inject a little bit of joy and a little bit of fun into their life. So I want to start by talking to you, Gabby, about Juliet Takes a Breath, because it's something that you wrote originally as a novel, and it was originally a novel, but for those that aren't familiar with it, it's a really forgettable queer coming of age story that explores race, identity, and what it means to be true to your amazing self, which obviously has is always relevant and is always impactful, but maybe in this time even more so. So in Juliet Takes a Breath, the main character Juliet takes a huge leap and moves across the country for her dream job, which is a very powerful it's also a very powerful coming out story for young people. So my question is, in writing the story, what did you learn about yourself? And on a related note, how much of yourself can the reader see in the character of Juliet?
Wow, you're not starting with the soft questions, huh? You're going right into the psyche, to the mind.
We only got 45 minutes, Gabby. We gotta get to the meat of it.
I mean, listen, you write what you know, right? So Juliet Milagros Palante is a 19-year-old, like chubby, queer, bouncy weirdo. So that's essentially like me trying to write about myself at that time, right? Like I had experienced very similar things in trying to understand my queerness and trying to navigate like whiteness in queer spaces and in feminist spaces, trying to explore my family backgrounds, being Puerto Rican as well. And so with Juliet, there's a lot of what she is who I am. But, and a lot of the ways that she is so curious about the world around her, and oftentimes maybe wrong in her assumptions, but is open to learning. Like, yes, that's me, but that's also like a little bit of a model, right? That I wanted to offer. Like, you can not know everything. You can take time and space to learn and to grow. Um, yeah, so I think that that is a big part of the journey with Juliet. And just getting it down, right? Like, I didn't set out to write some novel that was going to impress anybody or anything like that. I just wanted to share a story that my friends would want to read, that would feel like us, you know? And also in that, like, be really honest about who we are and who we are in our queerness and in our identities. And how much fun we have, and that we deserve to live and to like enjoy our bodies and ourselves, you know. That's a book too, right?
Yeah, totally. And that's so great, because I think, like, you know, obviously, what I think one of the magical things about this panel is a lot of the books have this theme of young people trying to become their true selves, and you know, find acceptance for that within themselves and in the world. But I think that one point you make about that, you know, I feel like nowadays there's so much pressure to kind of be your true self, but emerge fully formed, you know, as if like, you know, exactly who you are out of the gate. And obviously I don't think anyone here would pretend that we knew who we were when we were growing up. So I think that's such a great model to show, you know, characters that are able to make mistakes, you know.
Yes.
And your other comic and graphic novel project with Boom, BB Free, is similar in some ways. BB is a character that is in this kind of futuristic world. It's been 20 years since something called the plague
Listen,
that
it's
ate
the
greed
post-apocalyptic America that was changed by a bacteria, by a plague that wiped out 60% of the population. I wrote this last year. You can call me a soothsayer if you will, but you know, yeah, I wanted to have fun. Again, like,
yeah.
with Juliet, there's a bounciness, there's an energy, there's a playfulness, there's a gentleness in the language with the characters that I often feel like, especially kids of color, don't receive. Not, you know, like, we don't get it. And so with BB, I'm like, yes, she's going to be another chubby Puerto Rican. Tell me how many you actually know, because it's probably not a lot. So I'm going to put them in every story I have, you know. But young people are often dismissed, right? And it's young people that are fighting for like the climate change the hardest, and it's young folks and everybody right now fighting for what the world that we want. And so in BB Free, there's a world that is like emerging based on sharing and community and like connecting to nature and like healing the earth and finding your like inner divine power. So I mean, let's go nuts, y'all.
Yeah, that is awesome. First of all, I'm a little mad at myself that I did not read BB closer and see it as the prophetical work that it was, because it would have made me a little bit more prepared for March of this year. So but that's on me. That's not on you.
One of the coolest things is there's this girl empowerment group called the Radical Monarchs, and during this COVID time, they had Joy bundles sent to them, right? And BB was in those bundles, and all these young girls of color are like reading about a young kid of color navigating a post-pandemic world. It is wild. It's wild.
So one thing, as I was thinking about BB, is like you said, she's such a joyful character, and there's so much exuberance in the series, not only in the way that you're writing it, but the way that the artist Royal Dunlop is illustrating it. Right, there's this beautiful colors that explode off the page. But that's juxtaposed against the fact that BB's also, you know, really kind of fighting against the system that has come before her, right?
Right.
And some of that is institutionalized, some of that's familial. And I'm just curious again, if that was something that you're drawing from personal experience on. Are you sci-fi, I think so often is a great way to talk about current issues in a way that takes them out of the directly political realm and allows you to kind of talk about them as concepts. And so, I'm curious if that was something that was at the forefront of your mind as you were
Right. I
writing the
mean,
series.
yes, I'm always trying to imagine like what is the best offering, like what is the best model, what is coming from the best place. And it's like by taking out greed from BB's world, by removing that, I could remove so much of like what is kind of attacking us as a society. But I also wanted to make sure like characters there needs to be something to push against. There needs to be some sort of like, not necessarily evil, but like opposition. And so for BB, that opposition is coming from like some sexism and expectations from her dad to behave, to listen, to be quiet, to not push. And I think that I wanted to start with that core principle, right? Because so many of us are told to just behave, be quiet, don't speak up, don't talk back, so many don'ts. And I wanted BB straight out the gate to be like, I don't think this is working for me. I'm going to go ride my crocodile and my alligator out of the swamp. And we're going to like have a radio show and explore the universe together. And no one can stop me.
That is amazing. And so like the last question I'll throw at you, and I feel like you almost kind of answered it through BB, but what advice would you give to kids and young people today to inspire them to follow their dreams and to not accept reality for what it seems to be?
Oh my gosh, I think young people are already doing that. They're looking at us like, how are you all not seeing this? Like, have you seen those youth climate activists looking at government officials who are 80-something years old trying to deny climate change? These young people are like, are we existing in the same reality? So I mean, I think young people are exceptionally motivated, and I think what you should know is that we are here for you. And when you want something, when you want to make a change, or you need money, or you need support, adults in your life should be the ones offering that your support if you need it. And if you do not have a supportive environment, like, you deserve one, you should go find one. Like, there are people everywhere who want to help. Like, yeah, this is your world.
Oh, man.
Absolutely your world.
That's beautiful, Gabby. I'm ready to go follow you. Let's go do that. And now like you're making me think about like, oh, how am I talking to my kids? I gotta get them more pumped about this.
Yeah, let's do it.
Man, this is awesome. Hey everyone, I'm excited to jump into a pre-recorded segment. We're jumping to a pre-recorded segment because of the time difference between here in California and where John Allison is in the UK. And by way of introduction, John is the creator of the comic book series Giant Days by Night and Steeple, as well as the all-ages book series Bad Machinery. He's also created the webcomics Bobbins and Scary Go Around. And currently, he is writing with his Giant Days collaborator, Max Sarin. He's working on Wicked Things, which we're going to talk about. John's various comics have been nominated for Eisner Awards every single year from 2016 to 2019, which is pretty awesome. And with that, I am excited to welcome John. John, how are you doing?
I'm all right, Philip. How are you?
I'm doing great. So I want to start by talking about Wicked Things, which is our current series that we're publishing, that you're writing and Max is drawing. And it takes place kind of in this world, in this universe that you've created. And it focuses on everybody's favorite teen detective, Lottie. And she's appeared in other webcomics and comics that you've done, but this is really the first time she's, I think, stepped into the center of the spotlight. So before we talk about Lottie, I want to know, who is your favorite teen detective besides Lottie?
Well, I've spent a lot of time kind of writing teen detectives, and I've read a lot of them, and a lot of them are very dry, but one that I really like is Veronica Mars, the sort of just slightly post-millennial detective played by Kristen Bell. It's quite a sharp, sort of sassy series. It goes to some sort of interesting places, like personally. I think it's got that good mix of kind of like procedural case solving and angst.
Yeah. I love Veronica Mars. I remember discovering that show when it first came on the air. And I think kind of like a little bit like your work, it I think it takes things that we're familiar with, like you said, a procedural component and detective story that we're used to, and also, but through characterization and language, really kind of injects something fresh and new into it. I'm always surprised when I've gone back and watched it, how much of the language from that show, the dialogue, kind of like has made it into pop culture, you know. And that's one of my favorite things about your work is the dialogue.
Yeah, I think we're all magpies, and I know that I certainly watched programs like Veronica Mars very closely at the time, kind of looking at how you built something that was more than just a sort of procedural thing, how you kind of attached character onto the procedural, and yeah, you have to be quite sharp with your dialogue because you've got to get a lot of work done in a short space of time.
Absolutely. Well, diving a little bit deeper into Wicked Things, one of the things I think that is a big character development in the series for Lottie is that she goes from being an independent detective to actually being enlisted into the police force. So how in the story, how does she handle being a young woman in the police department? Is that something that you're tackling head on, or just something that you're kind of dealing with as a subtext? This is something that you thought about, I guess.
It's not so much that she goes into the police, because I was sort of wary. People don't super love the police at the moment, but my brother was a cop, so I kind of saw both sides of the issue. But even he didn't love entirely the world of policing, and so it's about it's a square peg round hole kind of deal, where somebody who's very independent goes into an institution, and then they just rub up against each other like sandpaper the whole time. And maybe you sand something and you smooth it, and maybe sometimes you just scratch it. And that's kind of like how Lottie is in Wicked Things. So she has to integrate into a system that can't really handle her.
Right, and it's really interesting, right? Because she is a young character and comes in with that young perspective into a very, dealing with a very well-established institution. What was the inspiration for Wicked Things? What was the genesis?
Well, I had a few friends who didn't go into university from high school. They went directly into the world of work, and they were often not people who'd failed, but people who were they were bored of academia and they went into the workplace, and they would often move much faster than people who were kind of slowly batting their way through academia. These were people who moved more nimbly, if that makes sense. So I was kind of inspired by that. It wasn't really the police so much as just people I knew who had to navigate from a very young age, and were able to, these very adult institutions and company setups and the interpersonal setups of adults. They never had that little hinterland of being a kind of ersatz adult that you get when you're at college. They kind of just had to be a grown-up, but they were still kids. So that was kind of like, that was my starting point, really.
And what do you think is the biggest difference between the way that you've approached writing Wicked Things versus Giant Days, which is, the long-running series that we did with you at KaBOOM? Obviously they share a universe, but they're very different books.
The main thing is that Wicked Things is very plot-driven. It has to be. If you write about crimes and mysteries, plot just eats pages. I had lots of hangout room in Giant Days. You could just spend time with the characters and develop kind of little sitcom situations quite easily. But once you've got to deal with the implications of a crime or an event, and you have to make sure that it makes sense, because if the mystery doesn't make sense, why read a mystery? There's plenty of people writing them. I found immediately that I had to be much more structural about what I did, and I had to be much more careful to kind of get the character stuff in between. So it was very much a case of very careful plotting, really.
That makes sense. So before we part, I think the question that's on my mind, and probably on a lot of fans' minds now that Giant Days has wrapped up, is who do you miss the most? Which character?
Oh, I miss them all. It's funny. I was very keen that there should be an end to Giant Days, because I think when readers have been reading for a long time, you have to give them an end. But I miss Susan, I think, the most, really. She was such an abrasive character, but she contained multitudes, if you like, and I could see lots of paths. She always gave me paths into and out of a story. She was like a saw, you could kind of just cut through the story with Susan in a way maybe you couldn't with some of the other characters. So I miss Susan the most. I sometimes wish I had that saw in the toolbox to kind of in other stories that I'm working on. But yeah, unfortunately, that she is back in the toolbox now.
For now.
For now,
Hopefully,
yeah.
we'll see. We'll maybe one day we'll see those characters again. I know I miss them a ton as well. John, thanks so much for taking time out of your day to join us and talk about the work that you've been doing with us. And look forward to our next conversation.
Definitely, thank you for that.
I'm going to transition over to talk about another book, another amazing book that is also inspired by a novel and is about young people, which is A Thief Among the Trees, which is an Ember in the Ashes graphic novel that takes place years before the best-selling Ember in the Ashes novel. It's a standalone graphic novel, and it follows three young military recruits, Elias, Helene, and Tavi, during their early days and their brutal training to become soldiers for the Marshall Empire. So, Sabaa, you wrote the original novel, but I'm curious if you and Nicole can talk about what it's been like to collaborate on telling a new story in the world of Ember in the Ashes. And Sabaa, for you, did you learn anything new about your characters through the process?
Well, collaborating was horrible, obviously. No, I'm kidding. Nicole's incredible. She was so fun to collaborate with. I had it was just, I learned not just about my characters, but I actually learned a lot about graphic novels, about how difficult it is to script. I learned a lot about dialogue from Nicole. Like, I thought, oh, I know how to do dialogue. And then she took this outline that I created and managed to turn it into this incredible script. And I was like, I know nothing about dialogue. It was such a fun process. It was, and then in terms of characters, your question about characters, I think it allowed me to dig into, these characters' past a lot more. I mean, when we meet Elias in An Ember in the Ashes, he's very much kind of at this place where he's like, I'm not drinking the Kool-Aid anymore. This empire that I'm a soldier for sucks. They're colonizers, they're terrible, they're murderers. But how do you get to that point when you've spent 14 years of your life training with these people, right? So this graphic novel really allowed me to explore that question. Like, what was the moment where that seed was planted, where he was like, I don't think I'm okay with this anymore, because he's a child, right? And so I think that, in general, we're very quick to be like, well, if you're a colonizer, you're evil. But the question is, where does that evil begin? And if you have children who are brought up into this way of life, when is there kind of opportunity to escape it, right? So that was one of the questions we were asking.
That's amazing, Nicole. Sabaa touched a little bit on it in her answer, but could you speak a little bit to the collaborative process and how that worked between the two of you as you were building the graphic novel?
I mean, of course, anytime I'm invited to play in somebody else's sandbox, it's always kind of like this huge honor, because somebody's essentially handing you their child and saying, please be careful. And I'm, standing there holding like, I love your child and I want to do the best by them. So it's always a blast, honestly. And Sabaa has such a rich and haunting world. I always use that word with describing the novels, haunting, because it's beautiful. It's like the ghost shows, you just keep going back for it over and over, but it's just so nuanced and there's always something to learn. And I feel like when I was handed this outline, it was just like a glimpse into how connected everything absolutely is. And as I always tell people who are just getting in, there is no such thing as a perfect first draft. There never should be a perfect first draft. And honestly, as much as Sabaa learned from me, I learned from her, because with each draft, it was like, oh my gosh, I never thought about something like this, how impactful just even a few words can honestly be in a script. And just seeing that from the perspective of somebody who's been entrenched in this world, it's just phenomenal. I loved it.
you know, one of the things you talked about is the haunting and the layered and complex nature of the novels. And, you know, the three main characters definitely find themselves, all three of them, having to make choices between what is right and what, you know, they're told is correct. And Sabaa, when you were talking about, you know, the character arc there, it reminded me, you know, one of my favorite movies from last year was Jojo Rabbit, because I think it's another piece of fiction that kind of tackled that idea of like, at what point, you know, if a child is indoctrinated into a certain way of thinking, you know, what are those kind of like moments of decision. So I guess my question to bring it into, you know, the real world a little bit, what are both of your thoughts on the parallels in the book series and in the graphic novel with what teens and young adults are experiencing today? And you know, do you have any advice for them, or do you are you seeing things that would lead you to believe that maybe young people today are processing and dealing with things better than past generations?
You know, I wouldn't dare to give advice to young people today. I think that they're probably doing very much like what Gabby said. I sort of think they're probably doing just fine without the millennial, the older millennials being like ba ba ba. But I would say that in the same way where my characters find in these very dark times, they manage to find hope. I see that in a lot of young people today. I see it in my own family, you know, when I think about COVID, when I think about just how stressful it has been to be at home and, you know, to be doing everything at home. I have an 11-year-old who is incredibly positive about all of this. And, you know, he has to do school, he doesn't see his friends, he can't go out anywhere. And he has this attitude that's just so hopeful. And that's amazing to me. And it's a beautiful thing. I see it with my readers. I see it when they send me messages saying, I read your book and this is what I took away from it. I don't have to tell them what to take away from it. They are sort of these incredible personalities and people who apply their own experiences in their own life to the books and then take away from it what they need from it. So in that regard, you know, I would say that that there is that parallel. It's why I really love writing about teenagers and young adults, because there is a sense of hopefulness there. There's not this kind of blah and sort of somewhat tired cynicism that you see in a lot of people who are older. And it's like, you know, it gets old after a while, right? So it's really fun to write these young characters who are like, things are difficult, things are dark, you know, things are scary, but we're gonna get through it. That's a wonderful thing. It's a joy to be able to write about that and to be able to share those stories.
And I think to add on to that, like as Sabaa said, I don't think the younger generation really needs advice from old people like me. But one thing I will say that when working on this book, with Sabaa, one of the things that struck me so much is Elias and Helene's journey, and knowing when to listen and when to speak out as somebody who's part of a system that is the problem. And I mean, I come from a specific place of privilege for very many reasons, and I think that's the one thing that really strikes me, especially watching characters in this book struggle with realizing what they're growing up into. It's realizing when you need to listen and when you really need to start speaking up, especially for those who have privilege and who are part of that system, and know that it's always okay to say I was wrong. And it's crucial to start listening and knowing when to say I was wrong and I need to listen. And I think that's one thing that the young kids are really good at doing. So props to them.
Yeah, it sounds like maybe the books and the graphic novel will be more helpful for the generation above the folks that are out there on the front lines asking for change right now.
I also think that there's this sort of dynamic in the books of and Nicole brought this up, so I'm just sort of expanding on that, of sort of when to tell your friends, right, that hey, what you're doing is wrong. Like that's not always easy. That's a scary thing. And I do think that's something that adults in particular need to hear, because there are family members that we should be talking to about their views and about their sort of ways of dealing with things, like what they'll call the police over, for instance, like there are conversations that need to be had. And we look at young people who are very willing to have these conversations. And I think that that really we could learn a lot from them.
Absolutely. Well, before I jump over to Matt, Sabaa, have you had enough fun doing the graphic novels that you think that we could do more Ember in the Ashes?
Yes, there will be another one. I just sent in an outline for it, so I'm super excited. We don't have a title yet. I can't tell you what it's about yet because it's not edited, but it is going to take place, of course, in the Ember world. It will also be a prequel. I can share that with you. And we might see some of our other faves. So there's obviously not just Elias's storyline in Ember in the Ashes, but some other characters who I shall not name. And so we might be revisiting these characters.
Awesome. So if you're watching this and you weren't already excited to run out and get a copy of A Thief Among Trees, which is out now and available in bookstores and comic book shops, you know that you've got another one to look forward to, because this is the official announcement of the second graphic novel. We're really excited about that. Matt, we've had the pleasure of working on a bunch of projects together over the last few years, but I think it's fair to say that like one of the biggest pieces of the news this month in our space, in the comic book space, is that you have a new comic book series called Berserker that you are co-writing with the one and only Keanu Reeves. So I got to ask, what has it been like creating a comic with Keanu?
What's funny is that, and I don't know how much behind the scenes you want to get or whatever, but I remember you guys called me and you're like, hey, we have this opportunity, maybe a thing. And I was like, well, what is it? And you're like, oh, Keanu's got an idea for a book. And I was like, well, okay, what is it? And I honestly, I approached it like I would any collaboration, because collaborations are just a crapshoot, like you guys are saying. Like it's when it works great, it's great, and then and if it doesn't, then it can be bad, So I'm always apprehensive going in, especially if I don't know the person, and it's like, so I was a little worried going in, but I was like, well, I'll take the meeting. Let's see what he's got to say and everything, and then he pitched his idea, which is like the idea of like this kind of immortal warrior, and it spans the beginning of time until modern day, and then there's more to it than that. I don't know how much we want to get into the plot, but he just spun this idea out, and he was backing it up with all the science and like this quantum physics and all these things that I just started writing it down. I was like, well, I don't know what that means. I'm gonna look that up. And so he kept spitting all this stuff out, and I was like, oh, this is it was super interesting. It was like an exciting idea, and it was one of those things where I've like probably for like the last 15 years I've been kicking around an idea of like a character that can't really die, or that like this idea of like living through all these eras and like what that does to you psychologically, if you can't die, and then if you see the same things over and over and over again, like what does that do to a person? So that was a theme, but I could never quite get it right. I had different ideas. Sometimes it was a vampire or something else, and it was just always kind of dumb. So then when he was telling this idea, I was like, oh, yeah. This is like, there's so much stuff already that I could bring to it. I felt that I was like, it just seemed like a good fit. And he's been a good collaborator. This.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny, kind of like tying this to some of our other conversation points. I mean, as millennials and Gen Xers, you know, like we think we're tired and weary of the state of the world and how things seem to repeat themselves. I think, you know, the character who's been through it over and over and over again, can't imagine how weary they would be. But yeah, I do know that, you know, it's been a really cool process, and to, you know, watch the two of you collaborate, and just for the folks at home, you know, beyond kind of pitching the initial story idea, how has Keanu been involved in the creative process with you, and what's that been like?
He's been so involved. I think that was my other thing going in. I was like, well, I don't want to do a thing where we just put his name on it and then it's you know what I mean? I've seen projects like that. So I was like, I don't want to do that, because I've been doing comics for over 20 years and I love comic books. So it's like, if I'm going to do it, I want to do something that's a good comic book. You know, this is what it's about. And so I was honestly, from the very beginning, that first meeting, I was like, if it's not going to be that, I'm just going to quit. I just won't do it. Like, I don't need, you know what I mean? I want to make a good comic. So if it's not going to be something that I think is going to be a good comic, and then we're both invested in everything, I just don't want to do it. Like, I don't want to be the one that's just like doing all the work and then it's just something else bigger than me or whatever. But he's been so involved, like from every step of the way. Like, we've plot out the whole thing. And I think when the first couple of meetings we were talking about it, and I was like, well, this needs to be like big. We need a lot of issues, like 12 issues, you know? And he was on board with that. And I was like, yeah, the more space, the better. And so we just blew it up into this big thing. And then working on the outline, we kicked it back and forth, and just hammered out every little detail about the character, and like what eras are we going to do, and like what's in each issue. And what's funny is like he had so many like smart ideas about the science and how it's going to work, and a lot of the little twists. And then and the other thing he brought to it was just like the visual storytelling, which was great for me as a writer, because I think that's the one thing with writers, a lot of times if you're just a writer, you're not thinking about how it's going to appear, or how the comic book works, or how the motion works, or the action. And but he's definitely thinks visually. Like, we would go through, we would draft the outline together, and I would type it up, and then I'd go through and I'd take a first pass with dialogue and scenes, and then we would go line by line through that, and he would act it out and then read all the lines. It was like, it's kind of a nightmare as a writer. If you write any dialogue and somebody reads it out loud, you hate it, right? Like, I don't want to, like, I'll give things to my wife to read and she'll start reading it out loud. I was like, no, I don't want to hear my words out loud. But it's a great test. It was a great stress test for the dialogue, because he would act out the scenes and then be reading the dialogue. And I was like, oh, and there's one line he did in particular. As soon as he did it, I was like, yeah, that doesn't work. And so we go back through it, and it's been great, because he's been so hands-on, but like in the best way. And then I feel like it's a 50-50 collaboration where we're both working together and telling the story, and he's bringing something to it that I didn't have, and then I'm bringing something to it that he didn't have in there, and it's really cool.
Well, that's the definition of a good partnership and a good collaboration, right?
Yeah.
So the other thing that I don't want to miss talking about is that Folklords, which was your most recent series with Boom, also has the collection of the series is released earlier this month. So one of the things I love about that series, and again in the way that it ties in with some of the other books we've been talking about, is your main character is has these visions. I think we're very used to the idea of reading about fantasy hero or heroes leaving the real world and going into a fantasy world. But in this case, you kind of flip that, and your main character lives in a fantasy world, and he's haunted by visions of our world, our modern world. And a big part of it is that he's trying to find out truth about himself and about a world that he feels like he doesn't belong in. I think as some of the other folks have acknowledged, that the young people are out there, and they're doing it, and they're already trying to push against what the rules are of this world. I guess the question I would ask you is, what do you think are there any lessons that Ansel can in the story teach young folks about the value of perseverance and not giving up?
Yeah, I don't know about lessons. I don't put lessons in my books, but I will say, here's what I will say, that it's funny too. Like, I don't write books. Everything I write, I don't know what it's about until it's done. Like, I don't go into a book being like, oh, this is going to be about it's coming of age, or it's like figuring, or fighting the establishment, or any of that. Like, I don't, like, for Folklords in particular, like, that idea came from it was kind of like a weird waking dream I had, like, before, in the morning. Sometimes I'll just lay there and think about whatever, and then I just had this vision of this kid in like a suit, like a straight up suit, and then but he was in like a sort of a Lord of the Ringsy type fantasy world, and like the idea of this guy standing out and not fitting in. And then but I didn't know what the story was. I didn't know what that was about. I was like, oh, that'd be a cool image. I could see it in my head. And then I just start writing from there. And then it's only when the book is done that I can sort of figure out what the book is about. And honestly, it's like interviews like this, or like when I go to conventions and somebody will have read it and they're like, oh, and then they're telling me what it means. It's like, yeah, oh yeah, I see that. That's, I guess that's what it's about, you know. I don't know. But yeah, listening to you guys talk about all this stuff, I think that like he's a kid and trying to figure out there's these systems set up, and he's trying to figure out how to work within that system, or where he fits in, or how does he fit in, and everything. And yeah, I don't know. I guess my take is I'm old, so I think old people have figured out how the system works, but they don't know what to do. And then the kids know what to do, but they don't know how to do it. So I think it's important for the old people, I'm calling myself old, to help the young kids that know what to do, help them do it. You know, and I think there's like, in hindsight, I look at Folklords, I'm like, yeah, that's because there's these librarians who are like the kind of like the oppressive characters in the story, who are like making all these rules and keeping everybody in line and trying to make everybody fit in the place they need to be. And of course he's not. He's like, I don't like this, you know. But there's one older librarian, sort of this mysterious character, who is there to sort of help. It's like he doesn't like it either, but he's part of the thing and he's trying to figure it out. So I don't know, maybe it's about that. Honestly, when I wrote it, it was about a kid in a suit running through fantasy world. So you can read it like that, and it's real fun. And if you want to put some other meaning into it, maybe it's there too.
On a related note, real quick before we wrap up the panel, Sabaa, I'll start with you. You know, Matt touched on kind of the thing that sparked and lit the match for Folklords as a story and inspired the characters. And it was a great example of sometimes where it starts isn't where it ends up, or the story kind of reveals itself as you're writing it. So I'm curious, with Ember in the Ashes and the characters in there, what was that initial spark or idea?
Well, I worked the night shift at the Washington Post. I was a copy editor there. And I worked on the international desk. So I was reading these news stories, and this was in like the mid 2000s, coming in, especially from Iraq, Afghanistan, where we were still at war, from Pakistan, from Kashmir, which is even currently still, having a lot of issues, from Sudan, where a genocide was going on, from Liberia, where there was an issue, like a civil war happening. And as a result, I was reading all these stories about what was happening to people in the world. And I was not seeing those things sort of reflected in a lot of the fantasy I was reading. A lot of the fantasy I was reading was very Eurocentric. So there was one particular story about these women in Kashmir whose fathers and sons and brothers are taken by the local military and never seen again. And there's no recourse for them. There's no, lawyers they can go to. There's no police they can go to. Their family members just gone, and they have to like deal with it. And that story really stuck with me and really haunted me, because I have two older brothers. I have a dad, and I was just thinking about what would happen if my family was taken from me. How would I deal with that? So Ember was really written as an answer to that question, knowing that in this world I couldn't really do anything, but maybe if I created a fantasy world, I could find a way for this character to get her family member back. That was where Ember began.
Amazing. Gabby, I feel like you touched a little bit in your earlier answer where Juliet and BB came from, but I'm curious if there's anything you want to add there in terms of what sparked those characters in your mind and what sparked the stories.
I mean, yeah, with BB in particular, Victor Laval and John Joseph Adams put together a really beautiful anthology, People's Future. And it's a lot of speculative fiction from writers of color. And so in that, I have a story about the plague that ate greed. And a couple, a young queer, gender expansive couple that is about to birth the first baby born to the planet in like 50 years or something like that. And so when thinking about BB and working with Boom and like what kind of series I would want to put together, I was like, there's something there. Like I want to take that story and bring it from the anthology and like really run with it and run wild. Yeah, and so the baby in that story who is born, like the first baby born is called Baby Free. And so I was like, oh, Baby Free, let's make her Baby Free. And let's like give her one of those fun adventure names, right? And like, yeah, like let's make sure, I wanted to make sure that she was just gentle and curious and like that even if you remove all the greed in the world, there's still like a world for you to inherit and to take care of. And there's still a world that is going to challenge you. And there's still like a world that you might even like be afraid of, but that you have that energy and you have that goodness in you to like handle it all and find your magic, you know?
I love that. What a perfect note to go out on. So in closing, I want to thank all our panelists for joining us today. And I want to thank all of you at home for taking time out of your day to let us share our passion for storytelling. I want to remind you that each of the graphic novels or series that we talked about are available for order or pre-order right now. I want to encourage you to discover them at your local comic shop or your independent bookstore if you can. And we have resources available on our website at boom-studios.com to find one near you. At Boom, we're storytellers, and we believe that the medium of comic books is the greatest way to tell our stories. So we get up every day excited to create new fans, readers, and customers for those comic book stories. And right now, maybe more than ever, we all need stories. Stories that help us reconnect with our humanity, that will help us make sense of what is happening, stories that allow us to escape, and stories that inspire us to do better now and in the days to come. So we believe that the stories we tell matter, and we want as many people to read them as possible. So whether you're one of the millions of people who have never read a comic book or just looking for that first comic book to share with someone in your life, we want to help you discover yours. Thank you so much for joining us today.